It's not like people don't understand what we're saying. It's just that they refuse to accept that this could be the real truth behind the nature of the disease. People say, well, there's clear evidence that cancer must be a genetic disease because people inherit genes that cause cancer. And the answer is, yes, on the surface that would appear to be true. But those genes encode proteins of the mitochondria, and the mitochondria become defective as the result of those inherited mutations.
1,600 people will die today in the United States alone from cancer. We have an epidemic, an emergency in this field. And there's 21,000 people in the world who die every day from cancer. Tragedy, for sure. The good side is there is a treatment protocol that can radically address, prevent, and treat most of these. Hi, this is Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today I am joined by Professor Thomas Seyfried from Boston College, who is one of the current pioneers in the application of this therapy, which stems from Dr. Otto Warburg. Now, most of you watching this have heard of Warburg before. He was, as most experts would not argue with, recognized as one of the most brilliant biochemists of the 20th century. Most people know he won a Nobel Prize in 1931 for the discovery of the metabolism of malignant cells. But what they don't know, that he also was an MD and a Ph.D. and was personal friends with Albert Einstein and many of the luminary, brilliant scientists of his time. He also didn't just get one Nobel Prize, he got several. Problem is, he was a German and chose to stay in Germany, and Hitler did not allow him to collect a second Nobel Prize in 1941, and he was nominated for a third. So, brilliant guy, he came up with this theory, and he's passed away, I believe, in the late 70s, maybe early 70s. And he's had some disciples since then. His first disciple who took up this cross. Warburg's one of his burning passions was to find a cure for cancer. And he did, he really did. But because he was such an eccentric and he lived in Germany, virtually no one accepted his positions, except for Dr. Peter Peterson out of Johns Hopkins University, who took up the cross in I think the early 80s and did a lot of novel work that Dr. Seyfried will discuss. And then Dr. Seyfried was the next. I view Dr. Seyfried as a third-generation Warburg disciple who's really doing some incredible research to advance this science. And he started it in the late 90s, early 2000s, and he's had some novel contributions, which we'll discuss about, that I think are just really profoundly illuminatory for helping you understand what the true cause of cancer is. I mean, that far exceeded Warburg's initial supposition. So with that preface, I would like to warmly welcome you and thank you for joining us today, because we're really anticipating and eager to engage in this discussion.
Well, thank you very much for having me on and telling you a little bit about some of the stuff that we've been doing.
Yeah, well, you're going to expand on that because you are clearly the expert. But yeah, I think maybe if we could expand on Warburg's work and how I think you got interested because you were studying seizure disorders, as many people do. Which is sort of the undisputed, uncontroversial application of nutritional ketosis. I mean, it is the treatment of choice for intractable seizures. And then you expand to others. So why don't you tell us that story and share what your current position is at Boston College?
Yeah, well, right now I'm a professor of biology. Our mission here is to do research and teach. And, we have a cancer metabolism class that I teach. I also teach general biology to the non-majors, because some of these students will be the only opportunity they have to hear about some of these things, and we educate them about a lot of issues on energy metabolism, cancer, and general biological issues that are going to help them better negotiate through their lives and understanding certain concepts. So, and we have an active research program that evaluates not only cancer, but also some neurodegenerative diseases like Tay-Sachs disease. We're working also using ketogenic diets to help deliver drugs to the brains of individuals with neurodegenerative diseases. But yes, a major focus, of course, is the use of metabolic therapies for managing cancer. And this has been a major input an activity of ours, and it continues.
Okay, great. So the traditionally held view is that cancer is a genetic disease.
Yes.
But what Warburg came up with, and which you don't believe, and I certainly don't believe, is that there is a significant amount of emerging evidence that shows that cancer is really a defect in the cellular energy metabolism of the cell, primarily related to function of the mitochondria, which really wasn't known too well in Warburg's time. I don't even think it was officially recognized and assessed. And I think it had a name, but they didn't discover the full characteristics of mitochondria until after Warburg. Well, after his Nobel Prize, certainly when he was alive. So why don't you expand on that? This because I think that's the central core of what we want to do. I've interviewed you before, and I recently read Travis Christofferson's book, Tripping Over the Truth: The Metabolic Theory of Cancer, which you're prominently featured in. And for some reason, everything clicked together, and I've just been beyond passionate about this topic ever since. It's really the full focus of all my time and energy to really expand on this, consolidate the information, and present it in a digestible format where people can understand. Because this is the game changer that not only treats cancer, but almost every single disease known to man. Because at the foundational core is mitochondrial dysfunction. So why don't I love your work because you're such an eloquent explainer of this topic. So I'll turn over the platform to you.
Well, you've certainly touched upon a lot of very important points in our understanding of what the nature of cancer is. And the first point, of course, is you're right. I mean, cancer is generally considered a genetic disease, and I refer to this as the dogma of the field. A dogma is an interesting concept. Dogma is considered an irrefutable truth, and that cancer is a genetic disease is no question. It's a dogma. The problem with dogma sometimes is it blinds you to alternative views and sets up ideologies which are extremely difficult to change. And the idea, of course, as I say, when we look at cancer, if you go to any of the genetics textbooks, biochemistry, cell biology, or whatever, all the major college textbooks talk about cancer as a genetic disease. The NCI website, the first thing they say, cancer is a genetic disease caused by mutations. So the question is when you have it coming from the highest levels of our established scientific knowledge base, obviously, how can all these people be wrong? How can this be so misunderstood? If cancer is a genetic disease, everything flows from that concept, and it permeates the pharmaceutical industries, the academic industry, the textbook industries, the entire knowledge base. There's very little discussion of alternative views to the genetic view.
If you want to learn how to implement the ketogenic diet and the Press Pulse protocol into your cancer management, just visit school.com/keto for cancer, the new community by our research analyst Johnny Rockermeyer. Within this new community platform, you can connect with other patients and learn from their experiences. You can also just search through the posts other members have already made. You will have access to our classroom section as well, which provides practical advice and tools for the best results. These sections cover all parts of the Press Pulse protocol that you should implement. Starting with the general scientific concepts by Dr. Thomas Seyfried, we will show you how to start the ketogenic diet, including which foods to choose and which to avoid. Additionally, we prepared a list of doctors specialized in metabolic therapy, as well as details about glutamine inhibition and hyperbaric oxygen protocols. So, take a look around at school.com/keto for cancer.
So the argument now is that yes, metabolic problems occur in cancer cells. No one denies that, but these are all due to the genetic mutations. So therefore, we must maintain ourselves on the established track that all of this metabolic stuff could be resolved if we just understood more about the genetic underpinning of the disease. Now that would be well and good if it were true, but the evidence is accumulating that the mutations that we see that are the prime focus and the basis for the genetic theory are actually epiphenomena. They're downstream effects of this disturbance in the metabolism that Warburg originally defined back in the 1920s and 30s. Now this is a very hard pill to swallow if you have focused your entire career and an enormous industries, multiple overlapping industries for therapies and whatever, on the idea that we need to understand the genes, we need to have precision medicine that's going to target these various anomalies, and then someone comes along and says that those anomalies are really epiphenomena. They're not the prime issue that you should be dealing with. This is a very difficult concept to accept or understand. It's not so hard to understand it. It's harder to accept it. This is the issue. It's not like people don't understand what we're saying. It's just that they refuse to accept that this could be the real truth behind the nature of the disease. And this then comes into the idea that you know, okay, so if cancer is a metabolic disease and the mitochondria are responsible for the origin of the disease, and the defective mitochondria are responsible, the defective energy metabolism is responsible for the majority of the phenotypes that you see, then how do we deal with the disease knowing that? So you say, well, most of the energy in our body comes from respiration. We breathe air, we give off CO2.
Oh, wait, before we, excuse me for interrupting, because you know, I know you're on a good track, but I want to take a little tangent to reinforce the concept you just stated. That cancer is indeed a metabolic disease, and despite what almost every single expert says otherwise. And I want to refer to the brilliant work, I believe one of your most magnificent contributions to the science, where you compiled research from some brilliant scientists who were all independent of each other, well-respected scientists within their disciplines, who conducted experiments, and they had no clue how to interpret them. But you did. You put it all together, and you know what I'm talking about with the transplantation component. So I think that will absolutely reinforce this concept, because we need to establish in people's mind that, yes, indeed, cancer is not a genetic disease.
Well, those experiments that you mentioned were always present in the literature. The nuclear transfer experiments, they were considered basically anomalies. They were not consistent with the worldview that cancer is a nuclear genetic disease, and they were more or less looked at, but not viewed in light of the origin of the disease. So, and you know, you come across these occasionally spread out over several decades in frogs and in mice and in certain humans and these kinds of things. And they all came to the same basic observation, but the observation was not interpreted in light of the origin of cancer. And that is basically, and what I simply did is I bundled all those observations together in a new light, looking at the conclusions of those experiments in light of whether the results would support a nuclear gene-based theory versus a mitochondrial metabolic theory. And I think that's the contribution. It's not that you know, it was just interpreting a series of experiments in light of the origin of a disease, and then asking what conclusion would these experiments support? Would it support the nuclear genetic theory of cancer, or would it support the mitochondrial metabolic theory of cancer? And in each of these cases, the results more strongly supported the metabolic theory of cancer than the nuclear genetic theory. So what we're doing, we're looking at this in the sense of the nuclear transfer experiments. The nuclei of tumor cells were transplanted from the tumor into a new cytoplasm that would contain normal components of that cytoplasm, which include the mitochondria, the energy-generating organelle of the cell. Now, if the hypothesis, of course, if cancer is nuclear gene-driven, and the phenotype of cancer is dysregulated cell growth, if the mutations are responsible for the key phenotype of the disease, then those genes should be expressed in the new cytoplasm, producing a phenotype consistent with the mutations in those oncogenes or tumor suppressor genes responsible ultimately for the dysregulated growth. And what was observed in repeated cases over and over again is that these new cells containing the tumor nucleus with a new cytoplasm did not form cancer. They did not grow unregulated. They became part of the society of cells as the organism developed. Now, what was interesting is that many of these nuclear transfer experiments, the organisms aborted at certain periods of development. And that abortion seemed to be related to how many mutations were in the nucleus that was transferred. So it was true that these cancer nuclei did contain mutations, but those mutations were not causing the hallmark feature of the disease, that is proliferation. Rather, they were causing abortion at some developmental point of the organism that had those nuclei. So the mutations, of course, you can't complete normal development if you have broken chromosomes, point mutations, deletions, and all of the kind of genetic defects that we see in cancer cells. But the key phenotype of abnormal proliferation was not seen in any of those experiments. Now, on the other hand, when the normal nucleus was transferred back into a cancer cytoplasm, either the cell died or it formed tumor cells. It didn't.
And that cancer cytoplasm had defective mitochondria.
Yes, that's right. So, and then further evidence came even more recently from Benny Kiripatu and his colleagues at Baylor, where they transplanted mitochondria, just the mitochondria, leaving the nuclei there. So the transplantation of normal mitochondria into a cancer cell cytoplasm caused the cells to stop growing abnormally, down-regulated the oncogenes that were supposed to be driving the tumor, and made these cells grow normally. And then if you took the mitochondria out of the tumor cell and moved it into a very slow-growing type of cancer cell, these cells now grew like crazy. So it was clear that it was from you bundle all these experiments together, and you come to the conclusion that the nuclear mutations cannot be the drivers of the disease.
If you're a rational human being.
Well, I wrote it in such a way, compare and contrast the observations in light of the two competing major theories of cancer, the mitochondrial metabolic theory versus the nuclear gene theory. And it should be obvious to most rational thinkers that these observations are the strongest data to date to say that cancer cannot be a nuclear-driven disease. Now, the argument, of course, is that, well, we have all these rare inherited forms of cancer, like Li-Fraumeni syndrome and BRCA1 and these kinds of diseases, and therefore people say, well, there is clear evidence that cancer must be a genetic disease because people inherit genes that cause cancer. And the answer is, yes, on the surface that would appear to be true. But those genes encode proteins of the mitochondria, and the mitochondria become defective as the result of those inherited mutations. As Warburg said, there are many secondary causes of cancer. There is only one primary cause, and that's damage to the respiration. So inherited mutations through the germline that cause cancer through an effect on the mitochondria, it is the mitochondria that is the origin of the disease. It just so happens that that defect is coming from an inherited gene rather than from a chemical carcinogen, a radiation, or viral infection, or an infection of some parasite or whatever, all of which damage respiration, all of which can cause cancer. So clearly the origin of the disease is a disturbance of the respiratory capacity of that cell, which then, if the cell is to survive, it must upregulate genes necessary for fermentation, and many of those genes are the so-called oncogenes. So the oncogenes are simply fulfilling a rescue event of that cell to function in a fermentation metabolism rather than in an oxidative metabolism. So we can downregulate oncogenes simply by putting in new respiration. So this is the origin of the disease.
So thank you for that very eloquent, detailed description, and you gave us a load of information. So I'd just like to extract one kernel and highlight it, because sometimes if you separate it with silence, people understand, rather than compacting it with a lot of other facts. The item I want to highlight is Dr. Warburg said that there are many secondary causes of disease, but there's only one primary cause of disease: defective mitochondrial respiration.
That's right.
That's the key.
Right. And
You've got to understand that, people. You have to understand that. And the traditional scientific community is not going to agree with you. But if you just listen again, because there's a lot, you gave us a lot of information, and thankfully this will be on video, and you can replay it as many times as you need to understand it. But that is the most rational, irrefutable evidence that any single person can understand. I've never seen a set of compiled experimental data that proved it any more eloquently than you did. So thank you so much for compiling that.
So,
I mean, that's a major service to humanity.
Well, and the idea, though, but in light of that, you have to explain how the mutations occur. You see, so this also has to be explained, and how you can how the mutations are not the primary cause but the secondary cause. And the answer to that is, once the respiration becomes damaged, right? This is and it doesn't, if it's damaged too acutely, all of the cells die. So you can never become a cancer cell from a dead cell. The cell is chronic. The respiration in the cells are chronically damaged. So the chronic damage then leads to a compensatory fermentation. Now, and that, as I said, requires an upregulation of oncogenes. But the damage to the respiration also produces reactive oxygen species. Mm-hmm. These are radicals that damage DNA, protein, and lipids. Mm-hmm. Now, those ROS, if they are acute,
lipids are the cellular membrane, which compose large portions of our biology. And if our cell membranes aren't functioning well, we have serious problems.
Yes. So what happens now is these reactive oxygen species, they not only damage further the respiration, but they also cause mutations in the nuclear genome. So here come the mutations. The mutations come as the result of the defective respiration producing reactive oxygen species. So this is the mechanism showing how the mutations, the hundreds of thousands of mutations that we see, are coming as the result of the reactive oxygen species generated from faulty respiration. So the field is focusing on the downstream effects of the problem, okay? And so personalized medicines, checkpoint inhibitors, all of these kinds of therapies are basically looking at downstream effects of the disease. Yes, and if a certain population of cells have that particular defect, and you can target that defect, you may in fact have success in some individuals that might have a considerable number of their tumor cells having that checkpoint defect.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, most of the cells in the tumor are all different from each other genetically. So you're not going to be able to target all of the different cells using these kinds of approaches, even though you may get success for a few months or even a year in some people. The majority of the people will not respond effectively to these kinds of therapies for the most part.
Okay, well, thanks. And I want to focus on one of the components you said, because you mentioned this element of reactive oxygen species in the generation of secondary free radicals. But one of the targets that you left out of your list was the actual mitochondria themselves,
yes,
where respiration occurs.
Yes.
So, and let me just word the question, because it's really an important one. I'll let you expand on it. But I believe that a large part of the reason why mitochondria become dysfunctional is because we're eating dirty fuel. Now, what do I mean by that? Glucose burns dirty. That is what almost everyone is burning as their primary fuel. Fat, or more specifically ketones, burn much, much cleaner. They generate far less reactive oxygen species. So if you have less reactive oxygen species being generated in the mitochondria, you have less mitochondrial damage, less signaling defects occurring, transmitting to the nuclear DNA, and less damage. So not only is refining the fuel that you're feeding your body the key component of treatment of cancer, but in my view, it is the primary way that you prevent cancer. So I'll let you respond.
Well, I think that's an important point. One of the things that triggers cancer is inflammation. We have inflammation. Chronic high levels of blood sugar create inflammation. This you see in a lot of situations. Okay, so glucose itself is not carcinogenic, but glucose, dysregulated glucose metabolism can lead to inflammation and can lead to it can cause a number of other disturbances in the overall metabolism of the body. Now, if you fast, if you stop eating, your blood sugar goes down, your insulin levels go down, and the body starts to metabolize fat for energy. But the fatty acids themselves are only one component. The major component, of course, are the ketone bodies. Mm-hmm. It's like putting a board or a long branch into a wood chipper. The fatty acid is the branch. It goes into the chipper, and out come these little ketone bodies. They're water-soluble fat products. They readily enter cells, and they're metabolized to acetyl-CoA through a series of steps. And these steps generate NADH, which is a reducing equivalent. But they also keep the coenzyme Q couple in an oxidized state. This is very important because it's that coenzyme Q couple where reactive oxygen species are in fact generated in the first place. So this is a little bit heavy on the biochemistry, because Richard Veitch at the NIH has done the majority of work on that pathway, and he was Hans Krebs's last student, by the way, and he has elegantly demonstrated how the ketone bodies.
Let me just interrupt there. Krebs, I neglected to mention in the introduction, was actually a student of Warburg. He actually wrote Warburg's biography.
That's right. That's right. And the biography was edited by Richard Veitch at the NIH, for Krebs's last student. And Krebs also had a great interest in ketones. He did some incredibly important work on the use of the body, by the way the body uses ketones. So ketones are clean fuel only in the sense that they suppress the formation of reactive oxygen species, especially when blood sugar levels are low. Okay, because if you have very high ketones and high blood sugar, you have ketoacidosis, which is a life-threatening event.
Yeah, there was only person in insulin insufficiency and type 1 diabetes,
yes.
Not in nutritional ketosis.
No, not in nutritional. Very rare can a normal person with normal physiology get ketones above 7 or 8 millimolar. Your ketoacidosis is up around 20 millimolar. I mean, you're so far from that range. So therapeutic ketosis is a very healthy lifestyle, healthy for maintaining maximum energy efficiency and reducing reactive oxygen radical production. So the mitochondria actually get very healthy when ketones are metabolized, as opposed to some of the other fuels like glucose, especially glucose.
Yeah, and this is a point I'd like to emphasize from a different perspective, because traditionally, for the last few decades, most natural health enthusiasts would understand the reactive oxygen species dilemma, and their attempt to circumvent this challenge would be to swallow antioxidants either through natural foods high in polyphenols or other natural antioxidants, or supplements in an attempt to reduce them. But I think that's a flawed strategy. I think it's a fatally flawed strategy, because it's far more effective to address it at the source, which is changing the fuel. And it's not that ketones don't generate any reactive oxygen species, because another piece of information that many people fail to appreciate, and I think many health professionals, is that reactive oxygen species are also signaling molecules, very powerful signaling molecules, and if you suppress them indiscriminately, you are going to have biological dysfunction. So you do not want to eliminate them, you just want to control them to optimal levels, so that all the signaling occurs ideally. Yes. And that's what happens with ketones. I mean, you're pretty much in the ideal therapeutic window.
Yes. You're right. There's no question about that. It's what we call a homeostatic state. Mm-hmm. And ketones allow they prevent a dysregulated reactive oxygen production. and that's basically what it is. And aging essentially is, we age because we collect oxygen radicals in all the tissues of our body, and age is basically the second law of thermodynamics, which is entropy, disorder. We spend our whole life pushing the boulder up the hill, but eventually the boulder does win, and because none of us survive immortal.
No,
None of us are immortal.
So I think there's another variable in there with respect to aging. I think is an important consideration is that it's not so much as pushing the boulder up the hill, but ultimately it's a failure of the repair mechanisms that are there. And once you damage those repair mechanisms, specifically mitochondria biogenesis, once that is damaged, then you're going to get crushed.
Yeah, well, the boulder comes back. Yeah, the boulder rolls downhill faster.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're basically, that's all we're doing is calorie restricted ketogenic diets, ketone metabolism, and these kinds of things delay entropy. Basically, what you're doing is delaying the second law. You're allowing your body to remain healthier for a longer period of time, and that's basically what we're doing here. Cancer is accelerated entropy. It's a total disorganization of the homeostatic the parameters within cells and outside the cells in the morphogenetic field and in the entire body itself. Cancer patients have all kinds of disturbances in systemic homeostasis. It's not just in the cells. You see, the problem is many people focus on cancer as a reductionist cell. It's only in that cell. When the body has cancer, there's a number of ramifications that take place throughout the body. We're producing more acidity within ourselves. There's a lot of responses on the part of hormones and signaling cascades throughout the body as the result of this disease. So one has to treat cancer as a systemic. The whole body has to be treated, but in a non-toxic way. And this is the failure of the current treatments is that the majority of treatments for cancer are extremely toxic to the body, causing even greater disturbances in the homeostatic state of the body. So when you look at cancer as a metabolic disease, there are ways to target and manage the disease without creating systemic toxicity, which is the standards of care. Most of the standards of care for cancer are extremely toxic. And when you view the disease as a metabolic disease, you just have to simply target the fuels that the cells are using. And that's primarily glucose and glutamine. And if you can switch the body away from these fuels, you'll have a better chance of providing longer-term management without toxicity. It's a little bit more difficult than what I said here. That's the strategy.
Right, and I want to discuss those now. But before I do, I want to emphasize another point to kind of frame the discussion around, and that we focus on the discussion of cancer. And I want to ask you one question before we go into the details. But the point I want to make is that it's not just cancer. Yes, 1,600 people will die today. And I believe, and I guess I can ask you the question now, because you probably have more experience using this nutritional ketosis as a clinical intervention in treatment and management of cancer than anyone I know of. And I'm wondering what your guess would be on how, of those 1,600 people who will die today, what percent would this intervention eliminate the cancer?
Well, this is a very difficult question. We can't say if the metabolic therapy will eliminate the cancer. In other words, the so-called cure.
Yeah.
The cure is I don't know, it's an arrogant kind of thing. We're going to cure cancer, right?
Well, that's what Warburg wanted to do. This is what Peterson wanted to do.
Yeah, well, they say it. I don't say it. What I like to say is, can we effectively manage the disease so that people can get on with their lives and not be not be crippled by the problem? I look for long-term management with a good quality of life. You see, now we don't know who's cured from cancer. The issue is, if you die from old age, from you had cancer at say 40, and you die at 93 from something other than cancer, we would know you were cured from your cancer.
Right.
But we can't know that because many cancers come as the result of the treatments. Some people are so-called, they use this 5-year thing. If you don't have your cancer come back in 5 years, they call you cured. But 15 years later, you get a new kind of cancer that came as the result of the treatment for the first cancer. Now, and that could be from toxic chemicals or radiation or a variety of other things that would be used. So was that person really cured of that cancer, or was it the same cancer that came back or a new cancer that came back? It's very hard to say that. So what I like to say is, can we manage cancer and maintain a high quality of life for as long as we possibly can? I think that's a more rational view to this, rather than saying metabolic or ketogenic diets are going to cure cancer. I've never said that. And other people say ketogenic diets will cure cancer. Now, if someone's on a ketogenic diet for 7 years and they're not, and their cancer is still there, but it's not progressing, are they cured or are they managed? Sure. So the question is, these are the kinds of concepts. So I don't like to say that we can cure cancer. I like to say that we can manage cancer and keep people in a state of quality of life.
Okay, well, that's a fair and really good response to my poorly worded question. Let me reframe the question, what I really meant to say, because my focus is really on prevention. But rather than go and try to plug the holes in the dike, let's go upstream and figure out where the problem is flooding, so we don't have any holes at all. So if we were to use nutritional ketosis, which I prefer than ketogenic diet because of all the baggage of the term ketones,
yeah.
If we use nutritional ketosis, effective nutritional ketosis as a therapeutic intervention prior to the diagnosis of cancer,
yes.
What percentage of those that would eventually develop a cancer do you think it would be effective? I think it's over 90%. I'm wondering what yours are.
I would say the same thing. It's between 80 and 90%.
Yeah.
So, and who's to know? Because we haven't really done any of those experiments.
We don't know.
These are pure speculative statements.
Right.
But what we have to recognize, in light of what we've done and others, is that if cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disease, and you get cancer because of mitochondrial failure in certain populations of cells in certain tissues, if you prevent your mitochondria from entering into this dysfunctional state, and cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disease, the probability of getting cancer is going to be significantly reduced. So to what percent? I would say probably 80%, at a minimum of 80%. So cancer is probably, as I said in my book, one of the most manageable diseases that we know of. Very little energy is given into prevention. Most of the energy in cancer is for cures, finding cures and finding new treatments. Very little energy is spent. The federal government spends very little energy on prevention. Now, the problem, of course, is many people, I don't want to say old people, the people don't want that. What do you have to do to prevent cancer? Oh, you have to therapeutically fast for a week? Oh, I'm not going to do that. Give me a break. I'll roll the dice and say, let me see if I'm going to get,
Right.
It's like, what? Oh, I have to exercise? So an effective prevention is to eat less and move more, and to a lot of people they don't want to do that. But I have to admit the younger people are recognizing this, and I think that more and more people are becoming to realize. Once you realize what cancer is, it's a metabolic disease. Yeah. Then you can take charge of those kinds of things. In other words, getting cancer is not God's will. Yeah. It's not the fact that you have bad luck. As some of the scientists say, you got bad luck. You have nothing to do. You just got bad luck. It's in your genes. You got bad luck. This is not accurate. You're exposed. Our environment. Now we have to recognize. I agree with you. Our food industry is producing massive amounts of food that's nutritionally deficient and full of things that can cause systemic inflammation, contributing to the risk of cancer. So we're bombarded, and the foods taste so good. They tweak our love of glucose, our love of sweets, and it makes us very.
You're probably not aware of. We spray over, I think it's almost a billion pounds of glyphosate as Roundup on our food crops that are mostly fed to animals.
Yeah.
Is a potent a potent contributor to mitochondrial dysfunction. I just learned that last week.
Yeah, no, I'm saying there's so many things in our environment that contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction. And, that manifests itself not only in the form of cancer, it manifests its form in the form of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is another one of these metabolic problems. People who have Alzheimer's disease are hypometabolic. One of the questions at the NCI was, how come people with Alzheimer's disease have a lower risk to get cancer? That was one of the provocative questions. And the issue is that they have low blood sugar levels. They are hypometabolic. It's very hard to drive a tumor if the fuels that to drive the tumor are in low concentrations. The bigger question is why people with Alzheimer's are hypometabolic. What's going on with their metabolism that puts them at risk for that disease. So, rather than focusing on the genetic variants of like all diseases, we have some that are inherited. These are rare genetic variants in the population. But, the majority of these different chronic diseases are the result of our environment, a gene-environmental interaction. And, the question is, okay, there's nothing I can do about my genetics. I've inherited this. I can't go about and retool my genetics. But I certainly can recognize the environmental factors that could predispose me for these kinds of diseases, and say, what can I do to reduce the impact of these negative environmental factors? And one of these is to, keep your mitochondria healthy. How do you do that? You burn ketones. All right. Now, people will go out and drink ketone drinks. They'll go out and have a big ice cream sundae and then swallow a bunch of ketones. I mean, what? That's not going to help. You know what I'm saying, right? People do these things. So
I was going to ask your viewpoint, not that strategy, but in addition to difference of using therapeutic interventions like exogenous ketones or short chain fatty acids like caprylic acids, medium chain triglycerides to generate. But anyway, we'll discuss that in a moment.
Yeah, but I'm just saying your body retains ketones when blood sugars are especially lower. Yeah. Otherwise, you pee out the ketones. So, this is another thing you have to, because we've done these studies in mice and we've seen this.
Yeah, so you can't have your ice cream and ketones too.
No. Yeah, you can look at it that way too.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah. So I just want to expand a little bit. That's why I want. Thank you for that response, because I wanted to frame that around there, and also mention describe in a little more detail what motivated me passionately about this. I've been motivated. I have a strong view on vaccines, largely because I know the damage they do, and I know that I did it to thousands of people. Thousands of kids that I ignorantly contributed to. So I'm really motivated about that. But similarly, I'm motivated about these cancer patients. Even though I didn't contribute to it, it just somehow motivates me emotionally the same way. And a film the best video film I've ever seen to illustrate, and it's a best-selling book too, is The Fault in Our Stars. And I don't know if you've seen the movie or The Fault in Our Stars.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend it, but I would caution you to only view that movie with a full box of Kleenex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll write it down.
So that contributed. Reading Travis's book and watching that, it all kind of had this confluence that motivated me. But then as I started studying, I realized, as you mentioned, it's not just cancer. It's every content. It's neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS. Then you've got the diabetes, the obesity, the seizure disorder for sure, slam dunk, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia. Everything that we're treating with all these drugs is basically solvable with a proper nutritional intervention. So that's what I want to focus on the last part of this discussion, because the devil's in the details. How do we do that? I know this is where I think we're going to have some disagreement, because I've come to different conclusions that you have on how to achieve this state, because that's what we want. You mentioned earlier that we have to reduce carbohydrate to probably, and let you respond to that, certainly under 100 grams, but probably under 50. And by carbohydrate, I mean non-fiber carbohydrate. I eat 150 grams of carbohydrate. 100 grams of that is fiber. So 50 grams is not fiber carbs. But then you said glutamine, but I think it's beyond glutamine. And I connected you with Ron Rosedale to discuss this, but I think it's just total amino acid content. I mean, certainly glutamine is important, but there's a threshold amino acid level. If you go above, you're going to stimulate the mTOR pathway, which works in conjunction with insulin signaling. It may be more a powerful influencer on mitochondrial dysfunction in mitochondrial biogenesis than insulin.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that. So I said a mouthful, so I'll let you respond, and then we'll fine tune it.
Well, the reason I mentioned glutamine is because the amide nitrogen of glutamine is the precursor for synthesis of nucleotides, DNA and RNA, and this kind of thing. So the cells need to proliferate.
Sure.
And glutamine is one of the amino acids that.
The most common amino acid in the tissue.
So that's why I said when the cells can use the glutamine, they can get energy from it, and they can proliferate from it. So of course, glucose and glutamine is like a supercharged system.
Yeah, because if you lower glutamine, you're going to lower protein. You just have to, unless you're just taking concentrated amino acid supplements.
You're absolutely right, and it's so much easier to target the glucose through these metabolic therapies than it is the glutamine, and I think this is where the challenge is, and I have to, but this is not an insurmountable challenge.
Oh no,
it's just that we haven't focused on it as much as we focused on how many mutations a cancer cell has. If we were to take all that knowledge base and figure out how to do this, we would be able to solve this problem in about 5 years. I mean, it wouldn't take that long. I mean, I had to be flippant about this, but cancer is a very solvable problem.
Oh, it's relatively easily. If you understand healthy clinical nutrition. Most clinicians don't. They're clueless. PC.
There's even a bigger issue, and it's not so much. I mean, we can discuss the most adequate and best nutritional compositions of foods and reducing inflammation and this kind of thing. It's not going to happen because, it's certainly happy for the people that understand and know about this, but for the majority of people, so we always have to look at economics, money, basically. Where does it become financially feasible to shift into this realm? And there's two ways to deliver medical care in this country, at least the two that I think of. One is fee for service. Mm-hmm. Patient goes to the physician. He's offered this therapy, that therapy, this test, that test, and every one of these costs a certain amount of money that's added to the bill, and the hospitals balance their budgets on this and everything. The other is global budgeting, where a certain amount of money is given to the hospital to care for the patients in that hospital. Now, if you do a really good job at caring for your patients, you can share in the revenues from the money that was given.
Incentivized properly.
Right. There's an incentive here. Now, if you can prevent chronic diseases like cancer, type 2 diabetes, coronary artery disease, through a dietary metabolic shift and training physicians and patients how to do this, you significantly reduce the number of tests and drugs that you need to handle for those patients. Therefore, the caregivers themselves will financially benefit from this strategy versus fee-for-service in those two ways. So this now becomes economically feasible to use metabolic therapies for treating these various chronic diseases. Now, this can happen in certain states and in certain situations. The question is, what is the incentive, of course, is that the physicians and caregivers are incentivized to use this kind of a therapy because it's keeping their patients healthy out of the hospital and not having all these procedures that are needless and very costly. We can save the nation billions and billions of dollars using metabolic therapy.
The healthcare budget is $3 trillion. We could save them billions, trillions.
We cannot continue to go down this path because it's going to cripple the entire country's ability to function in the world. We can't be spending 50% of the revenue of this country on healthcare.
Because the conflict of interest and the corruption between industry, basically a fascist governmental system. So, but there is a workaround. That's why I'm so excited, because there are people who understand the truth like you. There are large mouthpieces like myself who have reached to millions, literally tens of millions of individuals that can, you can offer them this program. It works. Their whole life changes. Their neighbor, their friends, their relative want to know, what did you do? And there it starts to spread it from ground level up, and then you change it from the bottom up. You don't change it from the top down.
No, you're absolutely right. It can't be changed from the top down because the interests in the top are not the same as the interests at the bottom.
It'll never happen. That's why we I'm passionate about GMO labeling, but I think we're going to try to do the federal government when Monsanto controls almost the entire federal government and departments that is related to this. No, it's impossible. They've locked it up. So you've got to do a groundswell workaround.
Yeah, and I agree. But I think that you're absolutely right. And I think these kinds of approaches are not so terribly difficult or so mind-boggling. changing shifting your blood sugar. Now, we published a paper on the glucose ketone index calculator in open access journal, which can be used for every person in any, whether you're a healthy athlete or whether you're a cancer patient or a diabetic patient. You can use the glucose ketone index calculator to assess the health vitality of your mitochondria. When you have a glucose ratio of 1.0 or below, your mitochondria are in a very healthy zone. So everybody can.
That's a really hard index to go to, and for those, just to expand on it, that's it's glucose to ketone ratio. Ketose by blood, not by urine,
yes.
and glucose in millimoles, not in milligrams per deciliter. So there's a formula, I'm sure, but there's a chart that you can go online that you can see with your numbers and convert them.
Well,
that's hard to get to a 1 and below. I mean, I can easily get to 2, certainly between 2 and 3, under 5 for sure, but under 1 is really, really hard unless you're totally fasting, which I don't think that helps.
You don't have to be in the 1 zone for very long. Yeah, I mean, if you're a cancer patient, you try to hit that zone as much as possible. I'll talk about that because it's different for cancer patients than it is for healthy people. Healthy people can get down. I've had one of my students got down to 0.3. Now,
wow.
Yeah, and my colleague Dom D'Agostino, he was able to get down in that zone too.
Wow. So, but you can't stay there for that long because you have to be fasting for a number of days. You want to take a water fast to do that?
Yeah, you do a water fast for about 3 or 4 days, and then you can take some ketones.
Sure.
And you can get your blood sugars way down.
That's only a short time. You cannot do that long term.
Well, I know some cancer patients who are not taking any standard of care, no radiation, no chemo, because all that stuff elevates. It's very hard to get a low index when your body is in a state of anxiety. Mm-hmm. There's a stress issue that prevents the index from going as low, and it happens more in cancer patients than it does in people who don't have cancer. So there's some anxiety. So cancer patients really have to work hard to get their into that zone, into that ratio. But I've seen it happen so many times in healthy patients, healthy people, not patients. It's not. But you're right about how long can you stay in the zone. And to prevent cancer, you don't have to stay there, but for maybe 4 or 5 days, every 6 months or something like this. But it's just a guide. It helps individuals.
Well, that's one strategy. My viewpoint or philosophical impression is that it may be better to take an alternative approach rather than to go to an extreme, which is really difficult. I mean, you have to be water fasting and use almost exogenous ketones to get to those levels. Because normally, if you're the calorie restriction will work, but specifically if you can limit the carbohydrate, non-fiber carbohydrates below 50 grams, and your protein to below 1 gram per kilogram of lean body mass, which is pretty low. I'm 175, actually I'm 170 pounds now, or a little bit less, and that translates to about 70 grams of protein, and most people are taking a lot more than that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And we also found that it's very individual. Some people can get into these zones very quickly and very easily. Other people really struggle. Yeah. So it's all it is a biomarker gauge. We've done some very interesting linear regression analysis on survivability of mice with cancer using the GKI as the independent variable, the glucose ketone index. And there's definitely a statistical relationship. How low you can keep your GKI and how long you can survive with a very aggressive cancer. So clearly, it's just one biomarker system that allows individuals to help battle their own cancer. Okay, as I said, if you combine that with the certain drugs that work together with the system, or certain nutrients that don't forget, this is an emerging field. There's so much more we need to know as how to tweak this system, so that we can obtain maximal metabolic efficiency in our body while battling the disease. These are biomarkers that allow the individual to assess where they are, where they need to go, or where they might think they need to go.
Are you passionate about the groundbreaking and heroic research of Dr. Thomas Seyfried on metabolic therapy and cancer? So are we. That's why we've created something special for you, in collaboration with Johnny Rockermeyer, a German book publisher and translator. Introducing our collection of meticulously crafted books that distill the essence of Dr. Seyfried's work. Dive into the science and discoveries.
These summary books are your gateway to understanding the intricate world of metabolic ketogenic therapy in a clear, concise, and engaging way. Whether you're new to the subject or a seasoned enthusiast, our books offer insights that can change your life. Ready to explore this transformative knowledge? Visit our website at www.cancerasametabolicdisease.com to get your copy. You can buy the ebook there directly and the paperbook via the provided links. Here's the best part. A portion of every purchase goes directly to support Dr. Thomas Seyfried's groundbreaking research. That's why the direct ebook purchase is the best option to donate as much as possible. You can see all of the donations Mr. Rockermeyer has already made at www.ketoforcancer.net. That's right, when you buy our books, you're not just investing in your own knowledge, you're also contributing to the future of cancer research. Help us make a difference. Together, we can drive change and save lives.
See, without that, a lot of it's speculation. We don't really know why this diet or that diet helped, or this nutritional situation was more effective on one person than the other. We're simply trying to get biomarkers to allow us to know how we can better assess why some people respond better than others. So that's all it is, and we're trying to link those together.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because what I neglected to mention earlier is I'm so passionate about this. I am writing my next book, which is called Why You Get Sick and How to Fix It, the Metabolic Treatment of Disease. And what I learned from putting this material together so far, just an outline stage, but I hope to have it out later this year, is that you need a powerful online software analytical tool to do a very detailed nutritional analysis of what you're eating. Otherwise, you're clueless. You can't monitor and change things unless you know what you're dealing with. But then, secondly, you need a fasting glucose meter. There's no way around this. You've got to know what your fasting blood sugar is, and probably even take it twice a day before you go to bed, so you know what your sugar is before you sleep and what it is when you wake up. And then you want to get it to below 70. You want a fasting blood sugar like in the 60s or 50s is where you want it.
Yes, and well, the thing is too is that during the course of a day it can fluctuate, as you know. We call it the dawn effect. When you wake up in the morning, the blood sugar is much higher than it is when later in the afternoon.
You know what that may be? I think I figured it out. Gluconeogenesis. You're not getting enough protein. Especially if you're water fasting, you have to have amino acids. Your body catabolizes lean muscle tissue, generates amino acids, and in the process, those excess ones get shuttled to the liver, generates the extra glucose. And you could spike your glucose well above 100, even though you haven't maybe 10 grams of glucose.
Yes. No, you're right. Well, see, this is one of the reasons we developed the GKI index, because so many of the glucose, as you just mentioned, there's spikes. You can't believe it. This person got into an argument with the neighbor. The blood sugar went up to 160. I mean, cancer. They get all freaked out. They start to panic. And if you divide it by the ketones, it becomes much less of a swing. The ketones more or less buffer these swings in glucose. So
you still change it by increasing. I would venture to say that almost all those cases are due to person's not having enough protein. Well, and they got to measure the protein, because you don't want too much.
No.
It's not go liberal, but they're probably getting 20% less than they need, or maybe even less, 30, 40% less.
Yeah, well, that certainly could be true, and we don't know until we start doing these kinds of physiological measurements on larger numbers of people under different conditions, using these indexes, and that we will be able to precisely define them.
My personal experience, though, because mine was 70, and I just experimented and went down to 50 grams, especially with a little weight training. Bad. My blood sugar went up to like 120.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And then the very next day, I increased my calories by 300 calories, 400 calories, and increased my protein by 20 grams. 70 grams, it was 65.
Yeah. No. These are very important issues, and I think as all of us, a lot of us don't understand how our bodies work or our own physiology.
Sure.
So what we're talking about here is a personal understanding of your body and how it responds to these. And most people don't even discuss this. Know very little about it.
No, I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly with you, and that includes many, if not most. My guess is the vast majority of natural healthcare professionals who are advocating embracing this concept. They don't understand the protein component. They haven't integrated that into the equation, and that is going to be one of the central crux and thesis of the book to help people understand, actually go through the biochemical pathways of mTOR and all the other pathways that contribute to it so they can understand and paint a clear picture like you so eloquently did with your research, compiled it so brilliantly, and provided the entire race with the most powerful illustration to refute the ignorance of the cancer theory, of the genetic theory of cancer.
Yeah, well, this is the first step. The first step. The second step is the metabolic movement, the movement that's going to...
I can assure you, I'm committed beyond 100% to making sure this thing happens. I mean, it's the highest priority in everything I'm doing right now, just to teach these principles, because it is core to everything, and it's just bounces off brick walls of what almost everything is being taught. Partially because of Atkins, I think, because he had an interesting idea, but he absolutely didn't understand this stuff. He was clueless about the dangers of excess protein or even the quality of the food. All he thought was low carbs are useful. And yeah, it's useful sometimes, but a lot of times if you don't do it right, you're going to cause more good than more damage than good.
Yes. Well, and the other thing too is when you talk about ketogenic diets, they're not all the same, and the ratios of the different fats to the proteins to the carbohydrates are extremely important in how this actually works within your body. It's not just a generic fat.
No. And it's probably individualized, so you have to customize for yourself. And that's why you've got to do testing. Yes, you can do ketone testing. There's 2 types of ketone testing: blood, urine, and breath. We don't recommend urine for reasons that we don't have time to discuss now. You can do the breath, which is pretty cool, but the blood is the best. It's a little bit expensive. You get your sticks on eBay if you want. It's half the price. But still, you don't test as much as glucose. Glucose are 40 cents a strip, 50 cents a strip.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right.
It's easy not to test that every day.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. I think, once people realize this, those ketone strips should eventually become the same price as the glucose strip.
I sure hope so, but I'm not too hopeful. And I'm not sure that it's necessary, because my guess is, and you have perhaps comments, if you're stabilizing at 65 or lower on your glucose, you're going to have low ketones. It's like really hard to have high ketones. It's really hard to have low ketones with a low blood sugar.
Well, actually,
or is it? Maybe I'm clueless.
This is the thing. It's not clear whether they have low glucose levels, but it's not clear that they have high ketone levels. So
yeah, but they have low glucose for a metabolic reason, not because of nutritional intervention.
No, that's
nutritional
true.
intervention, you have low glucose and the right amount of protein, the Goldilocks version, not too much, not too little.
Yes.
Then you're in that therapeutic window, and my guess is to actually have some short and medium chain, at least medium chain triglycerides. I like MCT oil and coconut oil to sort of fuel the fire, because they convert to ketones so much easier.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right, and it's an individual, and it has to be managed that way. But the awareness of this is very important for people.
Yeah, and that's what I'm absolutely committed to do. So, you're a resource, and you really have paved the way, and I just am really so appreciative for all the pioneering work you've done, and really taking a lot of flack. I mean, you just painted a huge arrow or target on your back, and I'm sure you got a lot of arrows in there, because what you were promoting did not sync with what everyone else was teaching. Just you and Peterson were out there. There were hardly anyone else. I mean, you had Coe, one of his Peterson's grad students, but not many other people were doing this.
Well, in my lectures, I think the physician groups are the most responsive to this. Those individuals that must deal with patients on a day-to-day basis and knowing what they've been confronting for all these years, and then there's an alternative which makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. They wish they could do this more. They are the physicians in the trenches who deal with cancer patients are many of the ones that seem to be most responsive. The guys who get big grants from the NCI and to study gene sequencing, and these guys are less responsive to this, as you could quite well imagine. But this will change. It has to change because this is the path which will make the biggest difference to people's lives and eventually manage the disease. It's just how fast are we going to get to that? And I think cancer can be managed very effectively.
That's a good question. You've been doing this for 15 years now, right? 15 years, or maybe 16. I don't know. I thought you started in '99.
Yeah, well, we've been doing biochemistry of cancer for a long time, lipids and things like this, but it was basic science. It wasn't linked
Yeah,
to a
so,
translational.
but for 16 years, so what is your impression from your perspective on the shifts that have occurred over those 16 years? Give us your view.
Well, now for the first time we're getting initiating clinical trials on ketogenic diets, but it's like we're stumbling. People say, "Oh, we need a big clinical trial to do this," and right now, because of the individual variations and so many loose ends that we're not really sure of, I'm not in favor of taking 100, 200 people and putting them on a generic ketogenic diet to see what happens.
No,
I
we have to find the protocol first.
Yeah, we have to get the biomarkers set. We have to define what are the biomarkers we want to use to assess therapeutic efficacy. And this has still been debated, and you and I have just discussed this. What are the best biomarkers to assess therapeutic efficacy? Are the patients achieving these zones? Are these people entering or not entering the zone? What are the limitations? What are the compliance issues? How do you select patients that are going to be compliant? There's so many different issues that we need to do to really this is at the very beginning of a new form of treatment, and people need to vet all the variables so that we can then do a trial where we have control for all of the things we think are going to be the most important for assessing therapeutic efficacy, and then launch forward. It's not like a drug. It's very hard to do double-blind crossover studies with these kinds of therapies. So the pharmaceutical industry has established the procedures that all other therapies must adhere to. But when you're doing these kinds of therapies, you got to be very careful, because somebody's going to know whether or not they're getting a fat diet or a non-fat diet. How do you do double-blind crossovers? I mean, all of these kinds of things need to be discussed and launched. Now, we're stumbling around with a few clinical trials, which is good. So that's happening that never happened before. There's a strong scientific basis for this if people really understand the biochemistry of what's going on. And eventually more and more people will come online, and it's going to be a move. It's gradually going to take place, and then there's going to be anecdotal reports all over the place about people who managed their disease using metabolic therapy and avoided toxic treatments. So it's going to take time, but it certainly will happen. I have no doubt in my mind that it will happen.
All right, with that perspective, let me give you my with that bit of information, let me give you my perspective. I've been passionate about technology in addition to health for almost 50 years. I took my first programming class, Fortran and COBOL, 1968. And then I got my first computer in 85. It would have had it sooner, except I was in medical school and residency training program. So that's when I finished. And then I got online in 1995, about 2 years before I started my website. But I can tell you from my perspective now, which is I've been online for 20 years, actually 21 years now, because I got on in 95. And everyone knows how pervasive, how enormously encompassing, intertwining the internet is. Our life will never be the same again. And if you can just imagine back prior to 1995 how your life was compared to it is now. I mean, it's the internet. Well, and it's the web. It's the web/internet, because the internet started in 1968 with DARPA. But I think it's the same situation. I have the same feeling I did in 95, that we are on the threshold of an explosion of clinical intervention that's going to change the history of medicine. Literally will change the history of medicine. And we don't have time to go into the details now what that is. That's why I'm writing a book. If you my word and my commitment, I'm going to have the protocol, and hopefully you can use it as a part of the process as we start getting this feedback, this anecdotal feedback of all these success stories, so that we can design the clinical studies that will prove it and rapidly accelerate the adoption of this. So literally those 1,600 people don't have to die every day.
Yeah, I agree.
Needless pain and suffering. Yeah. And if you want, Fault in Our Stars, really a phenomenal movie that will just drive that home on steroids.
Yeah. That's very important.
Yeah, so you've got to know why, and once you get the emotions behind it, you get going, and you have a reason to do this. Because there's no doubt, I've actually applied this myself, and I know it works. I know, and I've refined the protocol. So I'm not talking out of my butt. I'm talking about practical, anecdotal observations and personal, in my knowledge of 30 years of health and medicine, and applying that, integrating, developing a protocol that works, using very simple foods and targeting, using biomarkers like the daily fastings to target and guide your therapy and customize it. So I'm beyond excited about this because I think it's the most important thing I'll ever do in my life clinically, is to contribute to this field. And I'm so grateful for your part in contributing to the process of opening our eyes to this truth.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great work. So anything else you want to close? I kind of like ranted for a while, so I'll let you summarize and give your recommendation.
No, I think we've covered a lot of bases. We can talk more about this, but I think we covered most of the things. And I know I've had some people contact me who have watched your programs and have implemented some of these things. Gordon Emerson, I think, is one of the guys, and he has remarkable insight on this whole process, and he and his wife have experienced health benefits from some of these things. Again, these are anecdotal reports. Our goal is to write up peer-reviewed publications on this, and this is what I do. And I think the more these get out into the literature, the more things will change.
Well, one of the things I was negligent on in mentioning your enormously valuable contribution to the literature, which was a book. It's really a textbook, so it's kind of pricey. It's over $100, I think, or maybe $80 on Kindle. But it's the title is Cancer Metabolism, is it?
Cancer as a Metabolic Disease.
Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. So great book is available on Amazon, and if you really want to dig deep into the details, you can. We're going to put a link that summarizes most of that on a paper that you wrote that is open source that's available online in PDF. So that really good paper, and I think it's maybe 5-10 pages, and it really highlights the details from your book. So it just because we literally, but with my passion and your knowledge, we could talk about this for 10 hours and not exhaust the topic. There's just so much to discuss. There really is.
Yeah.
There's so many tangents we can take and everything, but people have a limited tolerance for this. So so don't get discouraged. I'm writing all this stuff up and putting it all together, and it's very easy to understand, implement program. So it'll be available later this year.
No, that's good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And hopefully we've inspired more people to seriously consider, because I didn't get it last time. This is my life's work, and still the light bulbs didn't go up until I read Travis's book. It was just like bang, bang, bang. It's like someone hit me in the head with a baseball bat, and I finally got it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's happening to more and more people come to this realization. And you're absolutely right. This is when things will really start changing. As I said, this is the tipping point. It is Dr. George Yu. He's been behind this, and Joe Maroon, Dr. Joe Maroon at Pittsburgh. There's a lot of physicians that are coming on board. So I think things are going to start changing for the best and for the success of people.
Too many people are dying needlessly that don't have to.
Yes.
It's just crazy. Just out of ignorance, and the knowledge exists.
Yeah.
The information is there. It's just a matter of applying it. So, there's no doubt in my mind that this is effective. So,